It's almost the end of the conference, so I hope you still enjoy your time here. And I'm very glad that I can present also something that is very related to my personal passion, my passion as a clinician, but also as the co-founder of iKnow, to see how we can save lives and the livelihoods with our iKnow technology. This presentation will review what we are doing at HealthFirst. And HealthFirst is a non-for-profit managed care organization in New York City. And so Jenny Huang will also present the results that we had at this project. Afterwards, Clint Moon will, let's say, do a kind of summarization, put the whole thing in a little bit in a broader context, and then also help with the Q&A part, right? So, as most healthcare organization and also HealthFirst, everyone is asking, is it really possible to make better decisions? And one of the aims is to see what we can do or have a better understanding of unstructured data in care management, high-risk assessment, and customer service nodes. And it's not just for fun that we want to do that, to have a better understanding of this unstructured information. And especially in the clinical context, you will see that most of the most important information about the members or of the patients reside in clinical nodes. So if you really want to have a good view, a good understanding of what's going on in your population, you need to tap in that unstructured information. I'm always surprised to see that people rely quite a lot on structured data. And based on structured data, they try to understand a certain domain. And I always compare this a little bit like if you want to study the surface of the sun during a total solar eclipse. So again, it's really important to tap in the unstructured information and have a better view on that. Let's see where we are. So in the next step, in a certain way, we want to transform unstructured or clinical node data into actionable information for care management and population health strategy. And of course, we want to do that to influence the quality of care and to improve the member outcomes. So please, Jenny, the floor is yours to discuss the other parts of our proof of concept.
Thank you. So as Dirk mentioned, my name is Jenny Huang. I'm the HIE manager at HealthFirst. So a bit of introduction about HealthFirst. We're as Clint also mentioned, not for managed care organization. We serve roughly 1.2 million New Yorkers in downstate New York. That's roughly 1 in 10. We provide a variety of products, including Medicaid, Medicare, and our long-term care plan. Most recently this year, we started offering our commercial plan for small businesses. As I mentioned, I work within within HealthFirst in the HIE department. So in 2014, HealthFirst partnered with HealthShare, and we created a private health information exchange to exchange clinical data with our sponsor hospitals and also our sponsor hospitals and our contracted providers. So for the proof of concept, we used care management nodes from 2 product lines. One is Hyfte, and the other one is a senior health partner. Hyfte is our dual Medicaid, Medicare product, and senior health plan is our long-term health plan. So for this proof of concept, we looked at 13 months of data. That's roughly 700,000 clinical notes, which includes roughly 13,000 members. So if you look at this diagram here, we essentially pulled the data from our health management system, which includes our diagnosis code, plus our clinical data, and I'll point out why this is important later on. and leveraging the InterSystems data platform. So when we started this, as you would expect, we perform cohort management for chronic conditions, and it can span multiple product lines. So we wanted to understand what we can learn about these populations that are not identified by our traditional methods, which in part is using claims data. So there were things that we expected to see, so concepts around members, personal care, PCP. So we blacklisted these concepts. And what emerged were some interesting clinical concepts that you see here. So things that we identified were medication, depression. The view that you're seeing are the top 25 concepts from our population. So it begs the question, do we need to do something different around our pain management program, right? And depression is in the lower right-hand corner there, is pretty dominant as well. So the emerging concepts from this pilot, like I mentioned, based on what we're seeing, do we need new cohort management programs? Do we need to introduce this population to existing cohort programs? And then as part of the proof of concept, we then ask, well, how do we identify these cohorts? So again, back to what you're seeing here, what you saw at a population level, then we looked at it and say, well, there are certain things that we know about depression, right? We can figure out based on their coded information, their diagnosis code. But then what can the unstructured data provide? So we looked at marrying the unstructured and structured data and identified members who do not have or are not coded for depression. And we identified roughly 9,000 out of 13,000 that had depression mentioned but are not coded. Now, I want to pause here for a second. That doesn't mean that they're not coded correctly. It means that, hey, there's an opportunity for us to further inspect this population. Sorry.
Wow.
Thank you. So one way for us to further inspect the population is to be able to look at the notes directly. So for this member, if you see where it's highlighted in green, it says depression. And then right before that line, it says DX. Depression, I can't even read it from here, sorry, but amongst other things. So again, this is a good example of us being able to look at the cohort, right? Understanding the data that we know, marrying it with the unstructured data we don't know, and then further inspect the details in a clinical note for that specific member. So we analyze the population, but we always focus on the individual. So how do we adapt the individual member's plan based on what we're seeing in the unstructured data? So there are a few things that we can do. We can look at the individual plan and making some changes there, or we can look at existing cohort management programs and determine if that member should be in an existing program, or is there an opportunity for us to create new management programs? So we took the same concept, looking at the population and what are the most dominant concepts, and then we took it and looked at the individual. So in this case, you see that the most dominant term here is TC. So when we first looked at it, what's TC? So as it turns out, it's telephone calls. So that probably means that there's a lot of outreach for this particular member. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll also notice depression. So we did the same thing. We clicked on depression, and then we're able to see all of the notes that have depression identified. So this is a good way for a care manager who are doing outreach to then have a quick snapshot of some of the most dominant concepts for a specific member. So after the proof of concept, we're now looking at potential business cases where we can leverage iKnow to provide additional insight.
Good.
Thanks.
So let's now go over to a very short demo, and then I will go back to explain a little bit about the background of the iKnow technology. Wherever we start with this kind of projects, for instance, doing patient cohort identification or selection, building predictive models, and so on, we always start with exploring the data. Because everyone and every healthcare organization is very proud to say, okay, we have a huge amount of data, but if you really ask them, okay, do you really know what's inside that data? No one can give a good answer. So every time we start with exploration, navigation through a certain data set. And for that we are using our, let's say, classical iKnow knowledge portal, as you can see here. And in this specific case, Clint Lewis, one of the sales engineer who was involved with this project, he added also an extra visualization, in this case, a word cloud in this iKnow knowledge portal. So once we have indexed a certain data set, and just to make clear what I'm presenting here is open source data, because I couldn't show, of course, clinical data of HealthFirst here, so I've used some PubMed data around breast cancer. So once we have indexed that data set, then you can see here on the left side what are the most frequent terms in that data set. And of course, it's no surprise, it's about breast cancer. And that is also what you see here in this graphical representation with a very specific, let's say, word cloud. We're also working on other visual representation, like more in the form of a network, where you could see how terms are, let's say, related to each other. What you can do with this knowledge portal is really click on one of these concepts, for instance, breast cancer, and you see all the similar entities in that specific domain. I just want to be very clear here, it's really on the syntactic level. So that means that, for instance, breast cancer patient has the string breast cancer as a part of this three-word group, and that is the list of similar entities that you see here. Because we parse sentences in concept, relation, concept patterns, we also can see what are the related concepts. The immediately related concept within this case, breast cancer, and you can see patient, woman, and so on, are immediately related with breast cancer. Or you can look at what we call the proximity profile. So what are other concepts that are, let's say, in the neighborhood of breast cancer. And I'm always very surprised to look at this proximity profile. I remember we once did work on sepsis, and for instance, if you look at this proximity profile, you can really see all the comorbidities, the signs and symptoms of sepsis. So in a certain way, it's a kind of, call it data mining on the fly. So with this interface, you can, of course, select one certain concept and then see all the specific sentence where breast cancer is mentioned. You can look at concept relation concept patterns, for instance, the treatment of breast cancer, and see in which sentences across that whole domain where this is, for instance, mentioned. So that gives you a quick overview of, let's say, the knowledge portal. One important next step we did at HealthFirst was also building a dictionary, and a dictionary then very specific about terms related to depression. Again, here I'm using another data set. So on the right side, you see already different dictionary items that I've built, for instance, about risk, about chemotherapy. So I have 4 different terms of chemotherapy here in my dictionary group of chemotherapy. And for instance, just I want to show you how we can build, let's say, another data entry in my dictionary. So I'm looking, for instance, for the word risk in our iKnow entities. You see that I've already risk in my data entry, and I can really drag and drop some new concepts in this dictionary. So this gives you a very easy way to understand and to build dictionary terms that are really in your domain. So, and that's an important part. So you don't have to invent in a certain way your terms. You can look and see what are the terms in a certain data set and add this to your dictionary. Once you have built such a dictionary, then you are, for instance, able to use this in, let's say, highlighting a specific text. For instance, I have here risk, and I can see that indeed I have chemotherapy, but also the word adjuvant chemotherapy in my text that is highlighted. That's a very specific feature of iKnow, and I will explain that just later on, is that we can discover in a certain way or define the semantic word boundaries of word groups. And for instance, in this case, adjuvant chemotherapy, and we see that we have only a partial match with chemotherapy. That is our dictionary term. Just go a little bit in a quick overview on, let's say, the basic iKnow background. And maybe most of you know that already, but I will give a quick overview of that. If you look at, let's say, the classical way of text analytics, then we call this really a top-down approach. What I mean with a top-down approach, people start building ontologies, dictionaries, and then from this formal structures try to fish and to find the word groups that are in a certain data set. The very interesting thing is that this top-down approach is not only, let's say, in the NLP world, but also in healthcare, and especially in healthcare organizations. If they want to improve clinical care, clinical pathways, what they are typically doing is trying to set up a work group with experts, and the more gray hair you have, the better chance that you are in one of these groups. And then you can start discussing clinical pathways, building clinical guidelines. And once you have that very nice document, then you give this to the care providers who are working day in, day out with patients. And what they see, that there is really a disconnection between this very formal, nice ideas and the real world data or the real world clinical practice. And that same philosophy, we also have applied this to our iKnow approach. And in such a sense that without knowing what's in a domain, so without predefined knowledge, trying to identify these meaningful word groups and the interrelationships between these meaningful word groups. And in a certain way, that fits also in the idea that we need to go towards data-driven medicine. Again, it's totally different with expert-driven medicine. It's bottom-up, it's starting from the data, having insight in your data, and go from there on. The way we are, let's say, parsing our sentence is in the following way. For instance, if you have a sentence, 2 patients are suffering from congestive heart failure, then we first look at what we call the linguistic representation of a relation. Mostly they are verbs, not always, depending on the context of some nouns. It could be relational elements. And so once you have found this linguistic representation of a relation, then let's say everything else is related to meaningful word groups or concepts. And in this specific case, in that sentence, you could see that it indeed goes about 2 patients that have congestive heart failure. Again, we identify this without predefined knowledge. And we are also very glad that we can do that in 10 different languages. So starting in Belgium, we start, of course, with Dutch, go over French, German, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Ukrainians, Russian, Swedish, and even it's working in Japanese. And I'm very glad that also here in the room there are some Japanese and also Japanese colleagues. Here we are very excited that this also works in Japanese. I said it already, we are doing this kind of parsing. That means we can generate a list of what are the most frequent terms in a certain domain. So for instance, here we are looking at the word depression, but also no depression is in this data set. And again, one of our other functionalities that we have is to track the negation. And in a certain way, we have negation on 3 levels. So within the concept, no depression or no hypertension, or the patient denies to have depression, so that the negation is extended to the, from the relation to the next concept, or you have a whole list of, let's say, items that are in a negated context. For instance, the patient denies to have hypertension, diabetes, and so on. Especially in clinical notes, it's enormous important that you could track this negation, because a clinician is mostly writing about elements in an affirmative context, but also saying, I don't see this and this and this. So keep track of negation is a very important issue. Again, we are not only looking at these concepts, but also this concept relation concept patterns, and that means we have a view on the context around certain starting points, in this case, for instance, depression. What we also see that the richness of these meaningful word groups, so we're with well-defined semantic word boundaries, is totally different than, for instance, the bag of word approach. Because the bag of word approach, everyone can recognize a single word. It starts with a white space and it ends with a white space. And these bag of word models are quite often used to train, for instance, predictive models and deep learning algorithms. And so instead of feeding these algorithms with simple bag of words, we are working on projects where we feed this with this meaningful word groups of the or the iKnow concepts. I've already shown during the demo that we can build dictionaries, and we call it evidence-based modeling. Why is evidence-based modeling? Because we are looking to the data itself, to the real-world clinical data, and based on that, we build our dictionaries, or also even our blacklist. I think you mentioned already the blacklist, that are the elements that are in a certain way not informative. So that's a very quick overview of, let's say, the way we have approached this HealthFirst use case. And Jenny, if you would like to add a little bit more content on the potential use cases.
Sure. So we mentioned earlier that we're at a stage where we're trying to figure out the best use cases where we can leverage iKnow. So what you see here is a list of potential use cases that we have discussed. So if you look at it, it's from population health improvement to member health improvement to other opportunities. So within population health improvement, we're looking to identify patterns to help us understand the direction of the members' mental and physical health, along with mining data for admission and readmission of leading indicators. So we also have leading indicators for risk of falling. So terms like cane that we've seen earlier would be helpful. Integration with HIE, since we already have HIE. How do we integrate the care management system with HIE to provide further insights? For a member health improvements, we want to focus on care manager interactions. So what we demonstrated earlier around having a snapshot of the members that our care manager is talking to is a really good opportunity. Potential barrier to accessing care, because that may help improve the outcomes. We know what the problem is. Improving the quality of clinical notes. So this is an interesting one. So we've noticed that there's a lot of cut and paste. I think that's an example in other iKnow sessions where I think, Ben, you mentioned it as well, and we found it in our notes. Lots of cut and paste, lots of mistakes. So how can we improve the quality of the notes? And then there are other opportunities too, like telephone documentations, so notes are being recorded. Is there an opportunity there to take a look at those notes and see if there are improvements outside of the clinical notes that we can examine? So the opportunities are broad. We just need to narrow it down and focus on the next item. Thank you.
Thanks for everyone coming today, and I want to say a big thanks to Jenny. We've been working closely over a number of months, actually, getting in December of last year, and it's been fun working with you and HealthFirst and the things that we're presenting today. Worked on a couple of these projects with clients, and HealthFirst being the last one, and you know, there's always an aha moment when you're working in an innovative world, and my aha moment was when we first made some progress with a client who had its bumpy starts. It was more of an IT conversation, but when we were able to get into that client and actually engage staff within the organization that really understood what was in that data set, and more importantly, and how that could potentially be leveraged within the organization, that was really the key moment. It's not a kind of a bits and bytes conversation. It really is about how can this data be mined, value be derived from it, and ultimately put it in an actionable form that can be used within the organization. So I think with these use cases that Jenny pointed out here, you know, it really comes down to how do you surface this information, marry it with other assets you have within your organization, and make it available in a usable form. You know, going back to Dirk's slides on the uniqueness of iKnow being that that bottom-up approach and taking the data set and surfacing concepts and relationships between concepts, it's fascinating to sit with any organization that understands that data and begins interrogating it. And you can think of this process that an organization goes through in engaging with iKnow. It starts with the navigation of the data, real time. As soon as you can index that data set, you can begin querying it and asking intelligent questions and gaining some insight into it. And then you get into your cohort identification like Jenny talked about, and then you get into some more of the interesting stuff on the modeling side. But I think the real end game with iKnow is all about getting to a clinical decision support system where you are providing information, usable information for, say, care managers at HealthFirst or people in a crisis management center where they have to get in and quickly triage and understand what's going on with the patient. There are many different ways this can be spun off within your own enterprise, but also affiliates that you may be working with that are may be interested in this information and their own clinical workflows. So I just have one question for people in the audience. Who are from end user organizations and who are from application or solution partners? Just see end users, show of hands. Okay. What I find is with the end user organizations, it's kind of a dual function. It's, you know, you certainly want to do those things that I was just talking about, which is deriving value from the unstructured data set and combining it and marrying it into workflows that you already have in your organization. But there's a very strong data science side of this as well, which is you're going to have the analysis of that data set and looking at it in different ways, spinning it around quality management, quality measure reporting, but also taking what you learn from that and constantly refining the model of that data set and how you're using it and pushing it out into your organization or affiliates you're working with. And then I guess the rest are solution providers. You know, I think, you know, I think the challenge there is really ultimately getting that data set for your clients, whether it's your own within your own EHR. We have some clients that are in the behavioral health world, 80% of the clinical records in the textual notes. But you have to ask yourself, you know, what is it in your own solution that can benefit from an iKnow and surfacing these concepts and making them usable as part of the clinical record, or marrying that with other assets within the organization that you combine with the solution that you are working with your partner on. But it's really, you have to engage either the clinicians that, you know, in this case, understand this data set, or, you know, whatever domain it is. You know, they know just from experience from working with it and maybe the hardships that they've gone through with other NLP technologies on how they can use iKnow to kind of short circuit that process to move it through to a point where you have actionable information being delivered into the workforce within your organization. So I think at that point, I mean, I would go and ask you if you have any questions for Jenny or Dirk on either iKnow or the project at HealthFirst. I'm expecting my friends from Primera, since they always have lots of questions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't ask one. Sure, absolutely. Yep, that'd be great. Just introduce yourself real quickly to JT.
John Tyler. I go by JT. I'm from Primera Blue Cross. We're a healthcare payer in the Washington and Alaska market. So a lot of what I've seen of iKnow so far looks like it's got a certain predisposition to healthcare-related problem sets. So, maybe I just missed it or something, but is there a way to generate other domains within
Yes.
iKnow?
It's actually domain independent.
Okay.
So you could be in financial services, you could be in call center.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's that bottom-up approach that allows the data and the concepts that are in the data. See, that's a great question, because that brings up the real challenge. I mean, when you have ontology specific to separate domains, I mean, that's a tall order to get that ontology set built for the domain. And I would imagine healthcare might be the most complex world to actually operate in, but it's domain independent. So we have clients in world of journalism, what else?
And that's exactly asking to let's say, the real feature of iKnow technology is that, these relational elements, in a certain way, they are domain independent. If you are a lawyer or a financial analyst or within healthcare, we as human beings are reasoning with a limited set of the same relational elements. And that's the strong part. And so that's what we have seen. That's also what we have, let's say, patent and put in this technology. And that gives us enormous advantage. So this can be used in different domains and also across, in this specific case, in healthcare. And because what you see, quite a lot of other, let's say, NLP tools are trained for very specific areas. And here, without predefined knowledge, you can extract this kind of information. So it's a key point.
One thing I would add to that, although he's the expert in the room, is that it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, we get into some engagements where they may have an existing ontology, and we can actually help improve that ontology set by what's derived from here. So they can work together. I mean,
Yeah, you must have
read
my mind, Clint, because what I was going to say is some of the stuff that was mentioned in passing in the presentation had to do with analyzing telephone calls,
Yes.
which is a big part of what we've been doing the last year and a half. And so if there are ontologies that are already developed in that space, that would be a very interesting thing for us to look
They
at.
could be leveraged if you had a data set. I mean,
Because we're building those things basically in code, right? You don't have an editor like what you've got with iKnow. We're doing that in Python basically. So.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's another very interesting part. So the fact that we can identify these meaningful word groups. So we know exactly it starts here and it ends there. And for instance, if you have an ontology, and I always give the example, let's say you have the word hypertension in your ontology, and wherever you see in your text hypertension, then you can say, oh, I found that word. Right. But what if you have in your text, for instance, the patient had acute pulmonary hypertension? What we can do is we know it's about acute pulmonary hypertension, but you only have partial information in your dictionary. And that's why we can flag, oh, in this case, it's not an exact match, so you could be wrong in semantic, from a semantic point of view, but it's partials. You are missing certain elements. And we can list these elements that you are missing in your dictionary, and that helps you to enhance and to improve your dictionary. Again, based on real-world data, so you don't have to invent your terms. You are looking at that's the data that I want to analyze. Here I see all my variations, and I want to put that in my dictionary. And that's a totally different approach.
Yeah, you're describing exactly what we've been wrestling with. Right?
Yeah.
So we have an ontology around helping us understand why our customers are calling us, why our providers are calling us, what about our product are driving these calls. And part of, a major part of the work has been trying to tease out exactly what you're describing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so here, again, you have the advantage that you can list all these meaningful word groups and then do this kind of mapping. And also, it's a very important part if you want to build clinical decision support systems, then if you don't have a good view or control over this semantic word boundaries, then you can have, let's say, semantic misinterpretation of your sentence. And at least here we can flag and say, okay, in this case, we are very fine. It is an exact match, so let's go for it. Or in other cases, could be only with partial information. So watch out. And again, if you don't have control over these word boundaries, you cannot do this kind of analysis. You can go even further on that discussion about dictionaries, but it's a very interesting domain.
I remember a session when we were at HealthFirst, and it was maybe the second session we were exploring the data, and going back to your question on ontologies. I mean, the ontology data set will never be comprehensive enough, and just surfing through a note, we were able to decipher at the member level, patient level, that their specific issue with their most recent calls was actually related to, I don't know, it was her daughter being sick, and her daughter was always helping her out, and she couldn't get to her appointment because her daughter wasn't available. There's no ontology for that. I mean, you can dive down and see these concepts and these related concepts, and you have a chance to go into the notes and understand the full context of what's going on at that point in time. So it's really deriving those nuances that for a care coordinator, it could be quite important that you need to contact the daughter. You need to, because engaging the patient at that point in time wasn't sufficient. So you'll never get that from an ontology set. And I think that's, ultimately some of the real granular stuff that comes out of these POCs, that they have their aha moment and they realize that they can make this a usable solution for their case managers to go out and quickly assess what's going on and quickly ask a series of questions to validate what they're reading, and then obviously improve that data set over time.
Yeah, and I want to add on to the building the ontology, because one of the things that we saw was when we looked up depression, there were other terms like loneliness, sadness. So it's a great opportunity for us to then add that, so that whenever these terms come up, we may be able to ask, depression-related questions to the member during an outreach.
Absolutely. So we have about 4 minutes and 47 seconds left. James, I'm disappointed you haven't come up to the microphone yet. Or are you saving your questions till later today?
JT's smarter than I am.
Anybody else? Questions?
Comments?
Well, thank you, everyone. Hope you had a good conference. It was an exciting year for us at InterSystems. We appreciate you coming down to warm Palm Springs, and hope you have a safe journey home. And if you have follow-up questions, you should feel free to reach out to Dirk or I, and we can certainly put you in touch with Jenny if you have some questions after the fact. But thank you again.